Terry. I couldn't believe what just happened. It was as if the whole world had collapsed in an instant. Helen, my wife, the woman with whom I have shared every day of the last 24 years, had just calmly left our house, as if she was going to the store to buy bread, but in fact to see her fellow partner Ray Bland, with whom she was about to spend this weekend. It was something absurd and stunning, something I could never have expected, although perhaps I should have. In all those minutes that she was packing her things, I never once heard words of love from her, or even an attempt to explain why she needed this. She didn't bother to assure me that it was all just a passing fancy or a stupid weakness caused by fatigue. Nothing like that. She didn't say that she might be glad to stay, but she couldn't do otherwise. There was not a drop of regret in her gaze. Not a goodbye kiss, not a gentle touch, not the slightest hint of the warmth that I had become accustomed to over the years. All I received from her as a farewell was a light, distant slap on the head, as if I was not her husband, but an old, familiar dog that could be left on the doorstep and forgotten. She left coolly, dispassionately, as if 24 years of marriage were nothing more than an episode not worthy of attention. A sharp, painful awareness grew inside me. Bitch, how cold and heartless do you have to be to leave like that? What now? I feel exhausted in a chair, numb from shock, but fear and pain begin to slowly transform into a storm of questions and painful guesses. We got married 24 years ago, when it seemed like we had our whole lives ahead of us. It was a time of hope and ambition, when each of us made our own plans for the future, but we believed that we would move in the same direction together. I had just graduated with a degree in information technology and, full of optimism, began my first serious job. This was a new stage, the first step on a professional path from which I expected a lot. Helen was still studying and dreamed of becoming a lawyer. She was talented, driven, and honestly, I felt extremely proud of her and admired her determination. Later, she pursued her goal and received a Doctor of Laws degree, and I was by her side, supporting her in this difficult journey. Those years were full of difficulties, but I helped her with readiness and love, without any doubt or hesitation. She wasn't just my wife, she was my soul mate, the only person I could imagine my life with. Supporting her was not an obligation for me, but a natural desire, because I was convinced that all this would benefit both of us. I saved every extra penny, saved money, tried to save for everything so that she could fully focus on her studies. Whenever I saw how worried she was about exams or fighting for a scholarship, I tried to create conditions for her so that she would worry less and think more about her professional growth. When Helen finally graduated and received the long-awaited diploma, her efforts did not go unnoticed. Soon after, she was invited to work at one of the city's prestigious law firms. It was a huge achievement, and I rejoiced for her as if it were my own success. Over time, her name became known in circles where high-level professionals are valued. She earned a reputation as a tough, unyielding lawyer who won most of the cases she took on. I saw how she became more and more confident, more and more successful, and this not only satisfied me, but rather inspired me. With her perseverance and talent, she reached such a level that she began to earn much more than me, and this did not cause any negative feelings in me. I was even proud of it. I was happy that her work and our sacrifices were not in vain, that my support was not in vain. We were a team, we achieved this together, and I was truly proud of every accomplishment. We often discussed the topic of children, and then, at the beginning of our marriage, we decided that the question of their appearance could be postponed for now. At that time, I thought that this was a temporary decision, dictated by the fact that Helen was just starting her professional path, and I wanted to support her in this 100%. I understood that developing a career requires maximum concentration from her, and the birth of a child would introduce additional obligations and worries into her life, which could become an obstacle to her dreams. Therefore, in principle, I resigned myself to this to postpone, as long as she felt happy and free in her decisions. But over time, her attitude towards the issue of children changed, and completely. She made it clear that children were not what she wanted for herself. "They will only tie me hand and foot," she said one day, and these words are firmly stuck in my memory. Unlike me, for her children seemed more like an obstacle than an extension of the family, and this certainly hurt me. So we never had them, and our marriage became a typical example of a double income, no children couple. On the outside, everything may have looked perfect. Successful careers, comfortable income, stable life. But sadness gradually accumulated inside me, which I tried to brush aside, convincing myself that we already had a lot to be happy about. However, from time to time, I could not suppress the thought that I would still like to have a child. Far inside, I yearned for this opportunity, imagined how I was raising a son or daughter, passing on my knowledge to them, raising them, passing on my surname. Of course, I kept these dreams to myself so as not to put pressure on her. At least once I wanted to feel like a father, to feel that I would leave behind someone who would be a part of me. I realized that even if by luck we managed to conceive a child, she would have found a way to get rid of it. Maybe she would have gone through with the procedure without hesitation, without even telling me. Deep inside me this caused indignation, but I tried to suppress these emotions, accepted everything as it was, and tried to enjoy life. Perhaps I could even live with this pain, but now, looking at the situation, I have to admit, now I rather feel relieved that we never had children. Helen has always been the dominant partner in our marriage. This suited me, since I like to put her interests above mine. It has worked so far because she has always respected me, or at least it seemed so. However, recently her attitude has changed. This may be due to hormonal changes. Her sexual appetite has increased significantly over the past few months. It didn't bother me. But last night she dropped a bomb, right after making love in bed. Tomorrow night I'm going to dinner with Ray Bland. Dinner, dancing, sex at the hotel. Back to you, maybe on Sunday, she told me, not even feeling the slightest sense of guilt. She might as well have said that she was taking the car to a service center. What? Why? I asked stupidly. Am I not good enough for you? I've been good enough for you all these years, right? True, she agreed, but now I'm in a period when one man is not enough. We'll still have fun with you. I just need new ones. I understood that it was useless to argue with her. She had already made up her mind and expected me to simply accept the role of her willing cuckold, as I had accepted so many other things in the past. A cold, empty void formed in my chest where my heart used to be, and I shuddered at the thought of the pain to come. I didn't say anything, just took a shower and went back to bed without bothering to kiss her goodnight. The next morning, while getting ready for work, I didn't say a word to her either. For the first time in 24 years, I didn't even kiss her goodbye or tell her I loved her. I'm not sure if she noticed, but I didn't care. For me, she was already dead. At work, I was like a zombie. All my thoughts were on what Helen was planning to do to me that night. I've read enough stories online to know what to expect. No, I was not going to endure this humiliation. I also knew what to expect from the divorce. In short, I would be completely ruined, and she would get the lion's share of everything. Screw this, I thought. There was no point in arguing with Helen either. I knew her well enough to know that arguing would only make her stubborn. And just running away seemed like a hopeless option. If she had told me about her plan a month ago, even a couple of weeks ago, I might have been able to just pack my things, leave the ring, and leave. Good at people can find work anywhere, and I knew I was good at what I did. But with so little time, I felt trapped. I thought there was only one way to deal with this. Someone has to die. When she got home that evening, she didn't say anything and just started getting ready for her weekend. While she showered and dressed, I took my .45 caliber M1911A1 pistol from its case and loaded it with a full magazine. My plan was simple. When Ray comes to the door, I'll shoot him. I hoped Helen would see this. I knew I would end up in prison probably for the rest of my life, but I didn't care. But this did not happen. When Ray pulled up to our house in his Maserati, he simply honked his horn. That cowardly bastard didn't even dare to come to the door. Helen patted me on the head like a dog as she walked out. She didn't see the loaded gun hidden under the pillow on the couch next to me. I didn't say anything but fumed as she walked out of the house with her bag. Then I felt disgusted with myself, but I admit, even with everything she did to me. To us, I could not shoot her, and running out into the street, shooting at a speeding car, seemed, I don't know, like a scene from a bad movie. After they left, leaving the house in complete silence, I took my laptop and, sighing heavily, opened the folder with photos of us together. I peered at these photographs for a long time, as if looking for an answer to my questions in them. Moments of our past appeared before me, those rare hours when it seemed that we were happy. Here we are smiling on a sunny beach in Cancun, laughing, hugging each other at the Eiffel Tower in Paris. Here are shots from the Caribbean cruise that we organized in honor of our 10th wedding anniversary. I remembered how happy I was at her radiant face then, sincerely believing that it was a sign of a strong union. In all these pictures we looked happy, confident that only bright times awaited us ahead. And now all of this had no meaning to me, just a bunch of old, meaningless pictures. As I sat alone, immersed in these thoughts, the feeling of emptiness around me became more pronounced. Unlike Helen, who always had support colleagues, friends, and now Ray, I was left completely alone in this world. I had no close family or real friends to lean on in difficult times. My only sister died very young, without having time to leave a mark in this life. My younger brother died, horribly, in a stupid and cruel fraternal initiation, which we all then considered an ordinary ritual. My father passed away a few years ago, and I still remember how Helen just didn't see fit to go with me to his funeral. She, without hesitation, said that she hated funerals, and she had two important matters that, in her words, cannot be postponed. The mother was heartbroken after the death of her father. After his departure, she rapidly declined, but stubbornly refused all help and lived alone until her health completely weakened, and 2 years later she too was gone. I called her about once a month, sent her cards for the holidays, knowing that Helen wouldn't even think about doing something like that. The loneliness and bitterness that the mother experienced became especially acute when she realized that she would never see her grandchildren. I also went to her funeral alone, again reserved, again alone, trying not to show any resentment or pain. I also had an uncle, a little crazy, but perhaps the only one who occasionally brought a bit of humor into our lives. Many years ago, he decided to go to the other side of the world, to the very wilderness of Australia. Since then, there has been no news from him, although my mother sometimes mentioned him in conversations, as if hoping that one day he would show up again. At work, of course, there were people with whom I maintained friendly relations, colleagues with whom we exchanged a couple of jokes during our lunch break or could chat about the latest news. Sometimes we even discussed weekends or recent vacations, but to be honest, I could not call any of them a true friend. There was no one with whom we could truly relax, have a glass after a long day of work, discuss our team's match, or simply agree on a fishing trip for the coming weekend. I was surrounded simply by the people I worked with, no more and no less. Lost in my thoughts, sitting in the twilight, I became increasingly angry with myself for this emptiness around me. I realized that, in fact, I had built my world in such a way that my entire existence revolved around one person, my wife, who now seemed to have no respect for me or our life together. I allowed myself to forget about my own needs, to neglect connections and interests that were not related to her. I gave up everything for her, supported her ambitions, put aside my own desires. And now that Helen has left, leaving me all alone, I finally realize how much of a mistake I made in giving all of myself to this essentially useless wife who never even looked back. I logged into our shared bank account and made some changes. Helen had her own account, just like me. This was one of the conditions we agreed upon when we got married. She also had her own credit card. Then I went to her law firm's website. I sent an email to every address I could find on the firm's website, including the managing partner, explaining what she and Ray had done. I knew they probably wouldn't see the letter until Monday, but I was fine with that. Then I printed out a short note for Helen, which I left on the coffee table under my wedding ring. He closed the laptop, put it in its case, and sat on the sofa, remembering better times in his mind. It took me a while to work up the courage, and I wished I had found her sooner, but I finally picked up the gun. Sorry, Mom and Dad. Hope to see you soon, I muttered. Helen, I was in bed with Ray that Saturday night. My vaccinations were up to date, and he assured me that he was completely healthy, so I enjoyed my freedom. We had sex in Ray's luxurious apartment, and before that we spent part of the evening drinking, dancing, and flirting. I bet your loser husband doesn't satisfy you like that, Ray boasted. I hadn't thought about Terry at all since I left home on Friday, and I didn't particularly like Ray putting him down like that, but he was right. There was a time when Terry could make love all night long, but that was a long time ago. Yes, Terry had always been caring and loving, but sometimes a woman just needs something special, I thought smugly. To be honest, I didn't think about him at all weekend, I said. You just pushed him out of my head. And don't forget that he is a little older than you, so this is to be expected. Have you thought about what we discussed earlier? You mean doing this in front of your husband? Ray asked in disbelief, raising a skeptical eyebrow. Yes, I answered, to remind him how things will be now. You have nothing to worry about. Terry is a real kitten. He won't do anything. He didn't even try to stop me when I left home on Friday night. Well, kittens have a habit of turning into mountain lions when they're pushed too hard. Remember the Connors case, Ray warned. You said he didn't try to stop you. Did he even do or say anything? No, I answered. He was just sitting on the sofa. In fact, he hasn't said much since I told him about it on Thursday, I added with indifference. Did he call or write to you? Ray asked insistently. No, I didn't call. Doesn't this worry you? Not really, I answered. I made it clear to him that this is what I need. He knows what I'm like when I've already made my decision. Either he's already left you, Ray noted with emphasis. He won't dare leave me, I said with a grin. He knows that I love him, and this is just sex. Ray looked at me as if to say, "What's wrong with you?" His gaze softened after a few moments as I frowned at him. As you say, he said, submitting, as a good lover should, I thought. Okay, Ray agreed. I'll help you set the rules for him tomorrow. We arrived at my house late Sunday evening. The house was quiet, almost too quiet. I looked at the yard and noticed that the grass had not been cut. Terry always mowed the lawn on Saturdays. I made a mental note that I would need to talk to him. After all, I expected that, despite my new interests, everything else would remain the same. Are you ready for this? Ray asked with emphasis. Certainly. Let's go get this done. Do you need some inspiration to get you in the mood? I set you a pretty fast pace this weekend. He just looked at me and shook his head. After making sure he was ready, I added, opening the car door, "Don't tell him anything." "I'll talk and you'll have sex," I said, opening the car door. I took my bag from the trunk and walked to the door. Ray was very close. I inserted the key into the lock and turned it. At least Terry hadn't changed the locks yet, I thought. I opened the door a crack, quickly slammed the door, and ran out onto the lawn, where I vomited. "What's happened? Are you okay?" Ray asked, coming up to me. "This is Terry," I finally stammered when I stopped vomiting. "He's dead." "What? Dead?" Ray almost shouted. "Are you sure?" I glanced at him. "Sure. What should I do?" "I think you need to call 911, Ray answered in a nervous, shaky voice. "Captain Obvious, thank you," I answered him sarcastically. He stumbled back, but quickly pulled himself together, looking at me as if I had turned into a cobra. "Sorry, Ray. I didn't want to snap at you. I just didn't expect this. Can you stay with me, at least until the police arrive?" I put my hand on his shoulder to calm both him and myself. "I think I can stay a little longer," he replied, his voice full of reluctance. "But it's still your problem. You'll have to deal with this." "Thank you," I said to him with a hint of irritation, taking my phone out of my bag. Idiot, I thought, dialing 911. The operator with a soothing voice said that the officers were on their way and would arrive within the hour. She recommended that I stay outside the house until they inspect everything. We got into Ray's Maserati and waited for the police, and at that moment it dawned on me. Terry is dead. All I wanted was a little extra sexual satisfaction. I didn't want this. I wanted everything else to stay the same. I wanted him to take care of me in my old age. The realization that this was now impossible hit me, and I burst into tears. Ray held me while I cried for Terry. "You know, you'll have to call Bledsoe," Ray said tensely when I calmed down a little. "They will probably write about this in the newspapers. The neighbors will chat. You'll have to file an obituary. Even if you decide to quickly, quietly, and privately cremate him and scatter his ashes, there will be consequences. And the company doesn't like to be caught off guard." "You're right," I said quietly. "Wilson Bledsoe was the managing partner of the firm where Ray and I worked. Better call him now before the police arrive," Ray urged. "You're right," I responded, catching myself speaking with restraint. "I am a lawyer," I reminded myself firmly, and then I dialed Bledsoe's number. He answered after the third ring. "Good evening, Helen," he said in his usual, slow and calm tone. "How can I help?" "Mr. Bledsoe, my husband, is dead. Looks like he did it himself," I said, suddenly feeling my voice shaking. "Well, that explains why he didn't answer my letter," Wilson said evenly. "Letter?" I asked in surprise, not understanding why my boss would write to Terry. "Yes, on Friday evening I received a very alarming letter from him. I didn't see him until Georgia, and I returned from dinner at the country club, but I answered as soon as I noticed. This is true." "Is it true, sir?" I asked, already apprehensively. "That you spent the weekend with Ray Bland in an intimate relationship? This is true," he insisted in the same flat, unforgiving tone with which he usually baffled witnesses in court. "Yes, sir." "It's true," I said, suddenly afraid for my job. The firm had a strict code of ethics for employees, and I knew that I could be fired for what I did. I also knew that Bledsoe's lies would only make things worse. "I'm really sorry to hear that, Helen." "Of course, I'm sorry about your husband. Have you called the police yet?" "Yes, sir, I did," I confirmed. "I think you'll have to do this for a few days. Take a week off and worry about organizing your husband's funeral. We will discuss your actions and your future with our firm when you return." "But I have Wilson's case," I objected. "Jenny Hawkins is your assistant in this case, right?" Wilson asked. He knew the answer very well because he appointed her himself. "Yes, sir, that's true," I answered, feeling my hands begin to tremble. "Jenny is a competent lawyer. I will ensure that she files a motion to reschedule so that she has time to look into the matter. You need to focus on finishing things with your husband. But I have to say, Helen, I'm very disappointed in you." "I understand, sir," I answered, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Is Mr. Bland with you now?" Bledsoe asked. His tone remained the same throughout the conversation, and there was not an ounce of emotion in him, like a medical examiner pointing out a bullet hole during an autopsy. "Yes, sir, he is here," I replied. "Please tell him to come to my office tomorrow morning," Wilson ordered. There was clearly an order in his voice that could not be ignored. "Yes, sir, I will," I replied. "Thank you. Please accept my condolences, Helen. We'll talk later." "Goodbye," Bledsoe said before hanging up. I froze in shock. It seemed like he received calls like this every day. I shook myself, put the phone away, and looked at Ray with a depressed look. "Well?" Ray asked with displeasure. "Mr. Bledsoe wants you to see him tomorrow morning." "Looks like Terry sent him an email and told him all about what we were doing," I replied. My world began to crumble, and I was completely helpless to stop it. Why did Terry do this to me? "Damn," Ray cursed. "This means we're in complete trouble," I finished for him. "Maybe," Ray said. "Maybe not. We both have experience, and this was just our first time, so maybe we'll be lenient." "Do you really believe this?" I asked. "Not really, but we can hope." "Damn it, Helen. I'm really sorry." "Me too, Ray." "It's as much my fault as it is yours," I admitted. I didn't imagine that he would react like that. At that moment, 2 police cars with lights flashing pulled up to the house, followed by a van from the coroner's office. One officer approached Ray and asked him to move his car so the van could move in. Another policeman approached me with a tablet in his hands. "Are you Mrs. Helen Baker?" he asked. "Yes, it's me," I confirmed. "Can I see your documents?" he asked. I took out my driver's license and handed it to the officer. He filled out the form, checking my documents. I observed 3 officers and 2 employees from the coroner's office put on latex gloves and white shoe covers and then enter the house. "Can you tell me what happened, Mrs. Baker?" the policeman asked, returning my attention. "I left home on Friday afternoon. Terry was alive and sitting on the couch when I left. I don't know what happened after that. I just got back and immediately called 911, I explained. "Terry, is this your husband, victim?" the officer clarified. "Yes," I nodded. "And you're saying you weren't home all weekend?" he asked, raising his eyebrows. I nodded again, and he continued filling out his notes. "What did you do this weekend?" he asked, trying not to show his emotions. "I was with a colleague," I answered a little evasively, and he raised his eyebrow again, writing down my words. This irritated me and gave me an unpleasant feeling in my stomach. It was one thing to tell my husband what I was going to do, but quite another to admit to a stranger what I had done. "Is this the man you were with when we arrived?" the officer clarified. "Yes," I confirmed, trying to remain distant, but failing. "I have participated in hundreds of interrogations and even testified myself, but this was the first time something like this concerned me personally." He tried to hide his emotions, but I noticed that he understood what was really happening. He asked me a few more questions, which I answered as briefly as possible. It took him about 20 more minutes to finish recording my statement. I had to tell everything, including the fact that I spent Friday in the most expensive nightclub in the city and then did not leave the elite residential complex from 11 at night on Friday until 4 at night on Sunday. I even had to give the apartment number. What could I do? Invoke the Fifth Amendment? Require a lawyer? He was merely taking witness statements at a potential crime scene. I'm just a witness, despite the fact that I was involved in the situation. "That's all for now, Mrs. Baker," he said. "Now I need to talk to your colleague." With these words, the officer walked towards Ray. Walking past where I had vomited on the lawn, he paused for a second, wrote something down, and then continued walking. I looked around. It was evening, but there was still enough light. I saw neighbors standing at the windows and watching what was happening with curiosity. Some even came out to their driveways and gawked at the scene. Damn it, did it all have to be so public? Maybe I should have slept with Ray a couple more times and returned home after dark. A few minutes later, I saw the coroner's office take a stretcher with Terry's body out of the house, get into a van, and drive away. The police followed them, and a man with the rank of sergeant approached me, holding 2 plastic bags in his hands. "Mrs. Baker, I'm Sergeant Smith," he introduced himself. "We found this weapon next to your husband's body. Did you know he had that gun?" he asked, showing the bag with the gun to Terry. "Yes, I knew," I answered. "This is a gift from his grandfather. He had this gun for many years." I felt strange and insecure. Previously, it was just a piece of hardware that I rarely thought about, but now I see it as a deadly weapon. Suddenly, I started thinking, maybe Terry pulled out a gun after I left, or did he keep it on him when I left the house, planning to use it against Ray or even me before turning it on himself? I immediately remembered all those murders that had been in the news for years and to which I had not paid attention before. Terry loved me, damn it. Really not. He always allowed me to get everything I wanted. Why not this? "We also found this on the coffee table," the sergeant said, showing a bag with a piece of paper. "Looks like he left it for you." I took the package from his hands and saw a note and Terry's wedding ring. Trembling, I read the note through the plastic. "Helen," the note began, "I would rather die than be your cuckold. For a quarter of a century I loved you and always put your needs above mine. And this is how you thanked me. Well, to hell with you, you selfish, ungrateful bitch. I pulled the trigger, but my death is in your hands. When you left to spend the weekend with Ray Bland, you killed our marriage. You killed me." I hope you live a long, miserable life, bitch, and I hope I appear to you every time you close your eyes." The note ended, "Burn in hell, bitch." I handed the note to the sergeant with trembling hands, realizing that he would need it for his report. My knees were shaking even more than my arms, but they didn't buckle. If I wasn't shocked before, I certainly was now. I was thinking about what Terry wrote. He had never used such language in my presence before, and his letter shook me to the core. To be honest, I didn't even know he was capable of this. Maybe if he had told me that on Thursday when I told him about my plans, I wouldn't have left and Terry would still be alive. With a distinct feeling of emptiness, I realized that the key word here was maybe. But I can't do guesswork and what ifs. I am a lawyer, which means I have to work with the cards that are in my hands, even if I dealt with them myself. I took a few deep breaths to compose myself and looked at the sergeant. Speculation and reasonable doubt are what I typically sold to juries for my clients. But now I suspected that my own reasonable doubt was lying on the front lawn, and any jury I might have to face was unlikely to be sympathetic. "Can I go back to the house?" I asked. "We are still inspecting the scene, madam. And to be honest, it's pretty creepy. Our coroner suggested that your husband committed suicide on Friday night, and I don't think you should stay here. At least for a couple of days. I have already called a cleaning company, and they should arrive shortly. If I were you, I would find a hotel and stay there until at least Tuesday or Wednesday. Can I at least take my computer and some things for a couple of days?" I asked as professionally as possible. "As soon as we're done," the sergeant replied. "This may take about another hour." He looked at me carefully, then pulled a card out of his pocket and handed it to me. "I understand that all this is a shock for you, madam. I strongly recommend that you talk to someone. I would recommend Gina Hastings. She is an excellent consultant. She's the one we refer our officers to when they encounter injuries on the job. Tell her you talked to me, and I'm sure she'll make time for you." "Thank you, Sergeant Smith," I replied. I was irritated by the idea of needing a consultant. "I will think about it." His facial expression showed almost no emotion, but I detected notes of disapproval and concern. After all, I was literally shaking, standing in front of him like a church bell. "You're right, madam, but I think you should call her as soon as possible. If not to her, then at least to a priest or a good friend," the sergeant said before returning to the house. Sighing, I walked over to the porch and sat on the swing Terry had installed last summer. This was another thing I insisted he do for me. And sitting on this swing, I suddenly realized that he and I had only used it once since he installed it. I thought about what Terry wrote. Even if I close my eyes, I will still see these words. A few minutes later, Ray came up to me and sat down on the swing next to me, but not too close. I looked back. Almost all the neighbors returned to their homes or drew their curtains after the van drove away, but it seemed a few curious people were still peeping. "What did they want?" I asked absent-mindedly. "They needed to know how our weekend went," Ray replied with a sigh. "Did you tell them everything?" I glanced at him, too numb to express indignation. "Practically. I didn't go into detail, just gave the short version," Ray said, apparently unaware of the ambiguity of his words. "What did the sergeant want?" "Terry left a suicide note," I said dully. "Where does he say how much he loves you and cannot live without you?" Ray asked sarcastically. "No, he said what he should have told me on Thursday. Called me a bitch and said his death was on my hands. And guess what?" "What?" Ray asked. "He's right. I really am a selfish bitch, and his death is on my conscience. You can't blame yourself." "He pulled the trigger, not you," Ray replied in a tone he probably found soothing. "After all, he didn't own you. You have the right to make your own decisions." "You are right." "I have the right," I whispered, thinking about Terry's words. "And I must be responsible for the consequences of my decisions." Ray looked at me for a few moments, which I was barely aware of, and then he continued, "I've thought about it all, and I think I know how to approach Bledsoe tomorrow morning. Now that I'm divorced and you've become a widow, No one will be able to cause problems for the company through lawsuits. Our little affair is personal and has no public resonance. There is no political corruption or social scandal. It's just a matter between consenting adults in a relationship. It's unlikely to attract anyone's attention and will quickly be forgotten. Therefore, it is not profitable for a company to fire or require the departure of two experienced employees. It's better if we both insist on this. I'll call you after the meeting tomorrow so you can get ready. I looked at him. Was Terry just a nuisance? The man who I now realized too late treated me like a queen had become a nuisance. The man whom I kept as a servant all this time has now become even less of a nuisance for me. Ray seemed to only care about maintaining his career and position, and didn't even realize that I was now desperately trying to save my own sanity. I thought about his words. Technically, he was right, there was no political corruption or social scandal. But I also knew that Bledsoe was committed to strict standards of behavior within the firm, especially regarding office romance. Let me know what Bledsoe says, I finally said. I'll let you know. Can you handle it? Ray asked. I can handle it, I answered in an even tone. In fact, I doubted that I would ever be okay again. But I was determined not to show it to Ray. Call me if you need anything, Ray said as he left. Okay, I muttered after him. Soon, an unmarked white van pulled into the driveway. A young man with long blonde hair came out and walked up to the porch. Is this the baker's house? He asked. Yes, I confirmed. Who are you? Jack Harrison, Harrison Cleaning Services. I was told that there was an incident here, he answered professionally, handing me a business card. Yes, I said quietly. The police are still inside. Great, thanks, he nodded. I watched as Jack put on his mask, shoe covers, and gloves before entering the house. A few minutes later, he and the police came back out. Sergeant Smith approached me as the others headed to their patrol cars. We're done, Mrs. Baker, he said. Here is my business card with the case number on the back. The report will be ready in a day or two. If you have any questions, please call. Thank you. Can I pick up my things now? I asked. Certainly. But you better put on your mask and shoe covers before you go inside, said Sergeant. Mr. Harrison has some spare ones he can give you. Thanks, I replied, taking his business card and putting it in my purse as Jack approached me with a pair of shoe covers and a new mask. The police left while I was putting on a mask and shoe covers. How long will you be here? It will take almost all night. I can call or leave a message when I'm done. Yes, I said, handing him one of my business cards with a mobile number. When you leave, just lock the house, please. I felt like I was taking a risk by leaving him alone, but I needed to leave. Moreover, his business card said that he was licensed and insured, so if something went missing, I could always sue. Yes, ma'am, he replied politely, took my business card and put it in his overalls pocket. I went upstairs, packed my things for 3 days, grabbed my laptop, and quickly left the house before my stomach began to rebel again. Jack was already busy in the living room. I told him I was leaving, and he waved goodbye as I walked through the kitchen to the garage. I drove to the nearest Holiday Inn Express and went inside, hoping they had a room available. Fortunately, the number was found, and I handed the administrator my bank card. A few moments later, she returned with a slight grimace on her face. Sorry, madam, but your card has been declined, she said, handing it back to me. What? I asked in surprise. We always kept enough money in our joint account to cover expenses for at least 6 months. I decided to deal with this later and handed her a credit card, which definitely had enough funds to pay for the room. This card worked, and I went up to my room. I was angry that the bank card didn't work, and I decided to find out what was wrong. The first thing I did was turn on the laptop and log into our joint account. If Terry were alive, I would kill him myself, I thought. When the page loaded, I saw a low balance notification. I almost lost my temper when I saw the balance $24. Damn it, what did Terry do? Looking further, I saw that he had donated all but $24 to children's charities, including a local church orphanage. I'm sure this was his way of showing that he was unhappy with my refusal to have children. But why leave exactly $24 out of all the thousands that we had? My first concern was to cover the bills that were due this month. All of our bills were paid automatically, so I transferred enough money from my account to cover them for the month. I wondered if Terry had done something similar with his personal account. I didn't have the login information for his online banking, so I made a note to go to the bank tomorrow. By this time, I was already completely exhausted both mentally and physically. Besides, I was hungry. I hadn't eaten since lunch, so I went to the nearest fast food restaurant and swallowed a greasy burger, which didn't sit very well in my already irritated stomach. Returning to the room, I took a shower and got ready for bed. I was so tired that I fell asleep as soon as my head hit the pillow. Well, I finally deigned to return to the house. A man's voice rang out. I looked back, but saw only thick, dark fog. I realized it was a dream, but the voice sounded like Terry's. Only this was not the quiet and kind Terry I knew. There was a threat in that voice. "Terry, is that you?" I asked, uncertainty. "I don't see you. Can you come out so I can see you, please?" "Of course," answered a male voice. I saw a shadow that stepped forward. I almost threw up again when I saw him. I was horrified and took a step back. Then I shook myself. "It's just a nightmare. There must be." "No. No. This is unrealistic. You're not real. You're just an indigestible piece of that disgusting, greasy burger I ate before bed. You have more fat than fear," I said with more confidence than I actually had. His eyes flashed red, and he moved towards me. "Okay, okay," I screamed in panic. "This is real. You are real. Now you finally understand it, you pathetic parody of a wife," he growled dangerously. "Terry, I started, but he raised his hand to stop me. "Shut up, bitch. It's all on your conscience. What do you say?" he asked. "Not much different from that tasteless $2,000 daub that you so wanted to hang over the sofa." "I thought you liked that picture," I protested weakly, confused by his angry tone. I hated her. But she made you happy, and then that was the only thing that mattered to me. Besides, I thought that you would soon get tired of it, just like you are apparently tired of me. So, was sleeping with Ray Bland worth what you lost? I lowered my eyes in embarrassment without saying a word. Although I didn't want to lose Terry over this, the truth was that it was the best sex I'd had in a long time. "You don't need to say anything. Here, Helen, all your innermost thoughts are absolutely transparent," he said with gloomy satisfaction. I felt my face heat up and tried to look away, but no matter where I looked, he was still standing in front of me like a persistent shadow. "I read your note," I muttered, desperately trying to change the subject. "Why didn't you tell me all this on Thursday when I told you about Ray?" "Would that change anything?" he asked sarcastically, as if he already knew the answer. "Most likely not. I don't know. We'll probably never know, right?" I snapped, hating to be on the defensive, but I had no explanation, no excuse, and nowhere to hide. "I think we both know the answer to that question," he snorted sarcastically. "What did you do with our money?" I asked, desperately trying to change the subject. And when I thought that I was deprived of legal means, anger began to rise inside me. "Bills still need to be paid. You are a smart woman. You'll understand for yourself," he answered with contempt. "I already know that you donated them to children's charities." "For what?" I asked, feeling my anger growing faster than my fear. "What do you care about? You deprived me of children, although you knew perfectly well how much I wanted it when we got married. I thought the money should go where it will do some good. If I could not leave them to my own child, I decided that other children could benefit from the fruits of my labor. Although, to be honest, you have already spent a decent portion of it. What about me?" "You know how I felt about the children," I replied indignantly. "Yes, I know. This became clear only a few years after the wedding. You've made it clear that you don't want a child to interfere with your career. You didn't want to lose your figure. I always thought that a child would interfere with your work and your rise to the top. And you got what you wanted, as always. just like you did with Ray. How did this work for you? At least I'm still alive. I didn't choose the cowardly way out, I hissed. His eyes glowed red again, and I terrifiedly hoped that this was just a painful dream brought on by guilt. If this is reality, then I'm done. Cowardly way out, huh? Do you think it was easy for me? Hardly. It was the second hardest thing I've ever done. Do you know what was the most difficult? He growled, his voice becoming like the threatening roar of a wolf, ready to grab his throat. No. What? I burst out in response, stunned by the change in topic. Watching you walk out the door to go see Ray, Terry growled again. After 24 years of devotion. I told you it was only for one weekend. I told you I love you. You knew I would come back, I said, angry and desperately trying to justify myself. Yes, you said that on Thursday. Do you remember what you did right before you left? No, not really, I said. What? You patted me on the head. Like a dog, you clearly believed that I would calmly accept the role of your willing cuckold. Fine. I don't remember that, but I'm sure I meant it with love, I tried to argue. Terry let out a sinister laugh that sent shivers down my spine. Yes, sure. Do you think I'll believe this nonsense? This is true. I didn't mean to hurt you. It would just be one weekend, and then we would have the rest of our lives together. We could survive this, I insisted. Did you really think I could touch you again after that? Knowing what you did, and what would you most likely do again whenever you want? You're just delusional. I told you that I would rather die than become your willing cuckold. And don't lie to me. I know this is exactly what you planned. How do you know this? I asked. Remember when I said that your thoughts are transparent here? Look, he added, pointing to something to his right. I couldn't help myself. My gaze followed his gesture. A cloud of shimmering silver mist appeared out of nowhere, which then transformed into a large disk. I felt a cold, terrifying wave run through my mind, through my soul, and I quietly whined. An image appeared on the surface of the disk, as if it were a window into another reality. That didn't happen, I objected hoarsely. No, but you and Ray talked about it, planned it, Terry said. You might as well do it. What were you going to tell me next? That this is just a one-time incident? What do you need more than one man to feel like a complete woman? I looked at Terry in shock. How could he know about this? Yes, Ray and I discussed this possibility, but we had no specific plans. Honestly. But none of this happened, I insisted. It doesn't matter here. In this place where I am, thoughts and words equal actions, Terry replied. And what is this place? Paradise? I asked sarcastically. This? Terry looked around. Hardly. And before you ask, this is not another place. It's just a space between your reality and mine, Terry explained. And suddenly I heard a loud ding, and a red light began to flash through the fog. What was that? I asked. Our time is coming to an end. I have to get back, Terry said. Don't worry, I'm sure we'll talk again. Wait, I have a question, I pleaded. Only one? Terry asked sarcastically. So far alone. Why did you leave $24 in the account? You are a smart woman lawyer. You'll figure it out yourself, he hissed. See you, he added, turning away from me. I jumped up in bed, my body covered in cold sweat. The sun's rays filtered into the hotel room, and I glanced at my watch. 8:30 m. Crap. I remember falling asleep last night, but it felt like I had just run a marathon. Exhausted, I trudged into the small bathroom and, finishing my morning chores, looked at myself in the mirror. The bags under his eyes were dark, and his face looked more wrinkled than ever. I'm only 46 years old, but the face in the mirror looked at least 10 years older. I remembered how Terry had said more than once that I looked 10 years younger than my age, and I sighed heavily. I had a long day ahead of me, so I took a shower, then put on some simple jeans and a regular blouse. After checking myself in the mirror one last time, I went downstairs to grab breakfast and a much-needed cup of coffee. Today was the first day of the rest of my ruined life. I didn't know then how destroyed it would become. I entered the small dining room and picked up the morning newspaper. I wondered grimly whether something had been published about Terry's death. Having received a light breakfast and a cup of coffee, I sat in a corner, away from prying eyes, and unfolded the newspaper. On the second page, there was a small note that said that Terry Baker apparently killed himself. It was mentioned that he had a wife, but my name was not there, which was a little reassuring. The last thing I wanted was unwanted attention from my sympathizers. After finishing breakfast, I headed to the car. As soon as I got behind the wheel, the phone rang. Taking it out of my bag, I saw that Ray was calling. I remember Wilson Bledsoe wanted to see him this morning, so I answered. "Hi, Ray," I said. "How did it go?" "Pretty much as I expected," Ray answered with a hint of doom in his voice. "I was placed on administrative leave while they investigate and decide what to do with me. They have procedures for such cases, but it doesn't look very good. When will you know the result?" I asked. "Within 2 weeks," Ray replied, "but I'm not going to sit idly by. I will look for options, maybe something will turn up. How are you holding up?" He added casually, almost as if by chance. "I can handle it," I answered boldly, not wanting to talk about the nightmare of last night that was still haunting me. Suddenly, a new thought came to mind. "By the way, does anyone else in the office know about this?" "Yes, everyone who has internal mail," Ray said with irritation. "Looks like your kitten told you everything." "Damn," I sighed, imagining how my career and reputation were going to hell. "Well, what to hide now? Maybe we can have lunch today," he asked with a slight hope in his voice. I froze for a moment, looking at the phone. It was as if I could read his one-sided thoughts. He was on vacation. He had nothing much to do except look for a job and probably continue his pleasures. And I just experienced the collapse of my life. Finally, I broke the awkward silence. "I have a lot to do today, so I don't think I'll have time. And it's unlikely that this would be reasonable under the current circumstances. What do you think?" I answered, a little sharply. "Perhaps you're right. I'd better let you go. Call if you need anything," Ray said. We ended the conversation, and out of curiosity, I checked the messages. There was a message from Jack, who said that he was leaving home. It was sent at 5:30 m, meaning he had been there all night. I saw another message from my older sister Janice. "I saw the newspaper this morning. Is this your Terry?" "Yes," I wrote back. "I'll call and explain later," I added before sending. Janice was 2 years older than me, and although we always got along, she had a tendency to play the motherly role. To be honest, I didn't want to discuss this with her right now. I drove home and parked in the garage. Satisfied with how Jack had cleaned and organized the living room, I headed upstairs to the den we used as a home office. I looked through our documents and took everything I needed. I put Terry's bank information folder, another folder with our wills and other legal papers, and a mortgage insurance policy folder in my briefcase. The silence in the house without him seemed too oppressive to me. The house became too quiet without him. I could clearly hear the grandfather clock below counting down the seconds, and for a moment I thought I smelled something. Rotten. A chill ran down my spine. Then I felt freezing air rush through the room, and I had to fight not to run away. I shook off this unpleasant feeling and returned to my business. Then I remembered that I needed to report Terry's death to his work. I glanced at the answering machine on his desk and saw several messages, so I decided to listen to them. They were all from his colleagues who were wondering if he would come and if he was okay. Sighing, I called back and was connected to his supervisor, Allison Jones. "Helen, is everything okay?" We called several times but never received an answer. "It's uncharacteristic for Terry to be late. Is he okay?" Allison asked excitedly. "No, Allison. He died," I answered as calmly and evenly as possible, hearing Allison sigh heavily. "Died? Oh my God, what's happened? Did he have a heart attack?" "No, he did it himself," I said, surprised at how calmly I could tell Terry's boss about this. "Oh no," Allison gasped. "When did this happen?" "They told me it happened on Friday evening. I was away." Over the weekend, I said, hoping that would deflect further questions. I'm so sorry, Helen. Please let me know when there will be a memorial service. I know everyone here will want to say goodbye, Allison said. I'll have HR contact you about his insurance and 401k retirement account. And please call if you need anything. Thank you, Allison. I appreciate it, I said, trying to sound sincere, but really, I was just glad she didn't ask more questions. We exchanged goodbyes and ended the conversation. It went easier than I expected. I knew that Terry's company had an insurance policy on all employees that paid out 2.5 times their annual salary in the event of death. It would have been about $250,000. I wasn't sure if their policy included such a death clause, but I knew that Terry had a decent amount saved up in his retirement account. This would definitely come in handy for me. I hung up and suddenly realized how still and quiet everything was in the house. We lived here for over 20 years, and they were mostly good years, full of happiness and joy. But now this place felt like a tomb. As I looked around, I saw Terry everywhere, remembering our years together. At least it was just a memory and not his ghost. A chill ran down my spine when I suddenly felt like someone, Terry, was watching me. But logic took over, and I firmly told myself that I was here alone. I walked through the house, opening the windows, hoping the acrid smell of chemicals would go away while I was gone. Pulling myself together, I grabbed my briefcase and left the house, perhaps a little more hastily than I wanted. I drove to the bank and went inside. After waiting for my turn, I asked the operator to tell me the balance on Terry's account. Although we had separate accounts, we signed bank cards so we could access each other's cards in an emergency. I took Terry's second bank card out of his folder and noticed that the PIN code was written on the inside. The operator looked at the computer screen, frowned, and then turned to me. "Just a moment, Mrs. Baker," he said politely, and then headed towards a row of glass-enclosed offices. A few minutes later, he returned with Arnold Johnson, the bank manager. We've worked with Arnold for many years. "Mrs. Baker, could you come to my office?" he asked in a friendly, inviting me. "Of course," I replied, following him. I took the offered seat and watched as he sat down across from me at his massive wooden desk, studying something on the computer screen. "Glad you came by this morning, Mrs. Baker," Arnold said. "I was going to call you later today." "About?" I asked, equal parts curious and worried. "Why? Our system recorded numerous transactions on 2 of your accounts this weekend. I wanted to make sure you were aware," Arnold said. "I know my husband made some charitable donations on Friday," I said. "He did it without consulting me. It was hoped that these operations could be stopped and canceled before they were credited. I also wanted to know what transactions were carried out on his personal account." Arnold raised his eyebrows and looked at the monitor again before answering. "I'm afraid that's impossible, Mrs. Baker. It looks like he made the donations right before operations closed on Friday, so almost all of them have already been credited. I need this money," I pleaded. "Is there a way to get them back? Perhaps you could contact these organizations and explain the situation. Perhaps they will meet you halfway. But this is not guaranteed," Arnold explained, almost apologetically. "I can print a list of all recipients. It looks like it will be quite long." I thought about it. A simple request probably won't be enough. Ultimately, I could try to sue them, but given the number of charities, I would likely have to pay more legal fees and costs than I could recover. Plus, my reputation would be at risk again. There was an unpleasant, nagging feeling of emptiness inside me, and I could almost see the headlines in the newspapers. "Greedy lawyer sues to deprive needy children of food and shelter." I could also imagine the jury hearing the case. So here we have an unfaithful wife whose infidelity led to her husband's death, and now she wants to leave the orphans without food and shelter. I think I should give her the middle finger. I'll be lucky if they don't vote to publicly tar and feather me. "If nothing else, you'd have a hell of a big tax deduction," Arnold said, trying in vain to lighten the mood. I stared at him in bewilderment, slightly confused by his attempt at humor. After a few awkward seconds, he cleared his throat and quickly looked away. What about Terry's account? I asked, trying to change the subject. Arnold looked at the computer, then checked a copy of the signature cards and other documents related to the account. He sighed, put on a professional face, and finally looked at me before continuing. There is just enough left in the account so that it won't be closed. There was also intense activity there on Friday. He paid off his credit card debt and then closed it. He also paid for something else. He paused, waiting for me to say something, but I just looked at him silently. Finally, he finished, and he made a large payment to Westside Funeral Home and Crematory. It was like a punch in the gut. I knew this funeral home. They were the ones who handled the funeral of Terry's parents. Clearly, Terry had carefully planned his death. What about our other accounts? I asked. He didn't touch them. Your general savings account and certificates of deposit are fine, Arnold said, checking the computer. Okay, I replied, relieved to accept this little good news. Do you need anything else, Mrs. Baker? He asked. Yes, I answered, taking out another folder from my briefcase. I need to file a claim for our mortgage insurance. We had a mortgage through a bank, and they insisted that we take out an insurance policy that would pay off the loan if anything happened to either of Terry and me. We obtained the policy through the home loan department. I handed the documents to Arnold, and after looking through them, he turned to the computer again. Everything seems fine, he said, taking another form from the drawer. You will need to fill this out and come back with a copy of your husband's death certificate. The next mortgage payment is due in a couple of weeks, so the sooner you can get this back to me, the better. I'll let the mortgage department know so they can be ready. Thank you, Arnold, I said, putting the form in my briefcase. Please, Mrs. Baker, and please accept my condolences. If we can help you in any way, please reach out, Arnold said as we shook hands. He was strictly professional, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was. Judging me, I tried to shake off this feeling. I thanked him and left the bank, feeling a little better than before I arrived. By this time I was hungry, so I stopped in for a light lunch and then headed to the West Side Funeral Home. I was immediately greeted by a thin young man in a white shirt and tie. His hair was neatly styled and covered with a thin layer of hairspray. He smiled and extended his hand, which I shook. Welcome to West Side Funeral Home. My name is Alan Markham. How can I help? He asked in a friendly tone. I'm here about my husband, Terry Baker, I said. Baker. Familiar surname. Please come to my office, Alan said with a smile. I followed him into his cozy office and accepted the coffee he offered. After he handed me a cup of hot drink, he sat down at the computer and studied the screen for a while. Yes, I see it here. I tried to call him this morning, but couldn't. That's because he's dead, I managed to say quietly. I see, Alan answered slowly and calmly. I'm really sorry. When did this happen? Friday, I said, deciding not to reveal unnecessary information. According to the data, he ordered a basic cremation service and paid for it in full. On Friday, usually, clients pay for funerals in advance, but rarely so short a time before it is needed, Alan commented calmly. Was he mortally ill? No, I answered, again refusing to give unnecessary details. After a short pause, he continued, still looking at the screen and not at me. In that case, we need to complete the preparatory steps. Do you have his death certificate? Not yet, I answered. I knew it might take a couple of weeks. His body was taken to the morgue on Sunday evening. As soon as the coroner's work is complete, I'll have it. When the body is released and you have the certificate, let me know and we'll get on with it, Mrs. Baker, Alan said. We spent the next hour discussing various aspects of the organization. Terry and I were not regular churchgoers, but I knew that he was raised a traditional Protestant, either Methodist or Lutheran. Personally, I didn't think there was a need for a memorial service, just let them be cremated, and that's it. Alan asked if I wanted to keep Terry's ashes, but the thought of it gave me an unpleasant chill. No problem. Mr. Baker has paid for the ashes to be stored in the columbarium. If you don't want to take them, Alan said. I left the funeral home in a bad mood and realized that I needed to talk to someone. Looking at my watch, I realized that Janice would probably be home since she worked part-time at the local library. I took a chance and called her on her home phone. "Oh, hi, little sister," Janice said when she answered the phone. "I was already wondering when you would call." "I was a little busy this morning," I answered. "I didn't imagine there would be so many things to do. Do you mind if I stop by? I really need to talk to someone," I added hopefully. "Of course," Janice said in the caring older sister voice I had known since childhood. "Richard is still in the hospital and will be back late, so we will have plenty of time to chat." Janice's husband, Richard, was a surgeon at a medical center and often worked late into the night. "Thank you, little sister. I'll be with you in a few minutes," I replied. We ended the conversation and I went to her house. She and I always got along, and I knew I could tell her anything, though she wasn't sure how she would take it. Janice greeted me with cordiality when I arrived at her door. "I received your message. Maybe we can discuss this over a cup of tea," she suggested kindly. Of course, I agreed as Janice went into the kitchen. I sat down at the dining table and fidgeted nervously in my chair, hearing her fiddling with the kettle. I was thinking about how to tell her all this. A few minutes later, she returned with 2 cups of hot tea. I added sugar to mine, as always, and although I wanted to immediately start telling my story, I suddenly felt like my tongue was stuck to the roof of my mouth. "Well, tell me what happened." Janice gently nudged me when she sat down opposite me. I took a sip of tea, collecting my thoughts, took a deep breath, and began to tell her about my weekend with Ray. To Janice's credit, she listened silently as I explained everything that had happened, my brief escape from my marriage, and what I discovered when I returned home. She didn't interrupt once, and her expression remained completely neutral while I told the whole story. I shuddered internally, but tried to speak evenly, describing what happened. What I didn't say was my plan to bring Ray home and force him to have sex with me in front of Terry. It didn't matter, and I also didn't mention the nightmare with Terry. I didn't want her to think I was going crazy. "And to think, I always thought you were smarter than me," Janice said quietly when I finished. "In the end, you became a successful lawyer, married a man who worked tirelessly to support you while you studied. Was your weekend worth the price?" Her voice was smooth and emotionless, but it seemed to me that her words were like a slap in the face. "It was only supposed to be a short rest," I protested sincerely. "I told Terry it didn't mean anything. It was just sex. Something I needed to do before I got too old. Just one weekend. And he chose the cowardly path." I snorted contemptuously and stared into my cup, avoiding my sister's gaze. Deep inside, I knew that I had lied to her. I told Terry it was only one weekend, but I planned for this to be the first of many. But Terry didn't know that at the time, and Janice didn't necessarily have to know either. Just sex, right? And you expected him to take you back as if nothing had happened? "Sister, are you really that naive?" Janice said quietly, still in the same caring big sister voice she often used with her children. Suddenly, I felt irritated. I'm not a child. I am an adult woman, attractive, confident. Didn't I just prove it? I came to Janice for support, to confirm that I was right, that I was a victim of circumstances. But now I had an unpleasant feeling that I wouldn't get everything I wanted. I looked at my sister, and her expression made me feel uncomfortable, as if she saw right through me. And then her voice became soft again, like a biting but invisible whip. "And if Terry came home and told you he was going away with another woman for the weekend, while he was still in his prime, would you welcome him with open arms?" I had never thought about this, and certainly did not expect such a question from my own sister, so I instinctively answered sharply. "First of all, Terry would never cheat on me. He's not that kind of person. Secondly, I would have destroyed him in court during the divorce, and he knew it." Only after saying this did I realize how terrible my words sounded. I had just admitted that I myself was capable of betrayal, whereas Terry, in my own words, was not capable of it. If I were in the courtroom, I would probably ask for a break after such a mistake. Janice didn't even blink, as if she expected this exact answer from me. "So you can have fun on the side, but he can't, right?" she asked, maintaining the same tone of a caring sister. "Of course not," I answered, confused. He had no reason to look elsewhere when he had me. I needed this. Deservedly, more variety. I suddenly realized that I had said too much again and hastily added, "Besides, it was just one time." "Is it true, or were you planning to move on? Maybe make him look, take secondary attention, or even bring home a whole set of men?" she asked, looking me straight in the eyes. I stared at her, shocked. Is this my older, traditional sister speaking? It's like she understands everything I was thinking. "Do you think that I don't know this because I work in a library?" she added calmly. "Did you do something like that with Richard?" I asked, shocked. "Of course not. I respect and love him too much to do that. But I know others who have," Janice said, making it clear that my behavior clearly showed that I no longer respected Terry. "And what did their husbands do?" I asked, with slight curiosity. "Most of them divorced their wives," Janice answered calmly, taking a sip of tea. "Of course, some went further. They exposed their wives to ridicule in front of friends and family and emptied joint accounts. They were left with nothing. And you still haven't answered my question. Was sex with that Ray Bland worth 24 years of marriage?" Suddenly, it dawned on me. I understood why Terry had left exactly $24 in our joint account. $1 for every year we lived together. Damn it! Janice must have noticed the change in my expression. "What's happened?" she asked with raised eyebrows. "Terry donated everything but the $24 to children's charities," I said, even more amazed by this discovery. "Oh, really?" Janice chuckled slightly. "This is not funny. We had enough money in our account to cover our expenses for 6 months." I answered irritably. "But you have to admit he had style," she said with a slight smile. "And what is that supposed to mean?" I asked, getting more and more irritated. Doesn't she understand what a difficult situation he left for me? At least half of this money was mine. You deprived him of the only thing he always dreamed of: children. So, in his final act of protest, he gave your money to help children, knowing how much you dislike them," Janice explained, shrugging and completely ignoring my anger. "I don't hate children. I just never wanted mine," I objected sharply. "Come on, Helen. I'm not stupid. I saw how you behave with our children. Why do you think they stopped bothering you? I have never seen you hold a child in your arms. It was always obvious that you didn't like being around children. I just never wanted my own." "After all, it's my body," I replied with feigned righteous indignation. "Yes, your body. And Terry respected that, although I'm pretty sure you only told him about it after the wedding." She sighed, putting the cup down. "It's a shame you didn't respect him as much as he respected you, isn't it?" "This is not true. I respected and loved him," I tried to object, but even to me it sounded unconvincing. "Is it true? If that's the case, I can't imagine what you would do if you didn't respect me," Janice said. "In fact, I can't help but notice how steadfastly you are coping with his death." It hurt me, so what should I do? Now I'm left alone. I have the responsibility. I have to pick up the pieces and move on. "Tears won't change the situation," I said, feeling irritation rise within me. "No, they won't change. But it might help you get over his death. Although you've never been one to show your emotions, have you? As far as I remember, you didn't even shed a single tear when our father died." It was a painful injection. There was a long, awkward pause, and then Janice said quietly, but with an intense gaze, "This means that you either lock everything inside yourself and are a potential time bomb, or you are a functioning psychopath and a danger." Before I could react, she added, "Or you're just deeply depressed, and it's all going to come out one day." Emotions have never been my strong point. "You know that," I answered quietly, resolutely suppressing any feeling of discomfort. "Yes, I know," Janice nodded. "So what are you planning to do now?" "Looks like I have no choice but to move on, right?" I said, letting the bitterness seep into my voice. "No, you really have no other choice," Janice agreed. But Richard and I will be there if you need help. We may not approve of your actions, but you are still part of our family, and we still care about you. Thank you, Janice. I appreciate it, I said, suddenly feeling really grateful that my older sister was still kind to me, even if she didn't think I deserved it. We spent about another hour having a pleasant conversation, which helped me take my mind off the depressing thoughts and calm down a little. Richard is on his way home, Janice said, glancing at the message that had just arrived on her phone. Do you mind staying for dinner? I'm afraid there will only be leftovers. Your leftovers are always delicious, I replied. I'll be happy to stay. We had dinner and discussed everything except the looming cloud of recent events, which suited me quite well. Richard wasn't as talkative as usual, but he showed some sympathy. When he first entered the house, he nodded at me and quickly glanced at Janice. They exchanged short, barely noticeable nods, slight winks, and almost invisible shrugs. Deep, marital understanding of each other. I turned away to hide my expression, wondering when Terry and I had lost such unity, and then suppressed the thoughts. Sad thoughts will not help you get your money back or pay your bills. We made it through the main course, which was lasagna. Janice was so used to cooking for the whole family that she always made more than they could eat. Then she brought an apple pie that she baked herself. I have always loved her pies and gladly took a big piece. The evening ended with a small glass of wine and some light chatting. Realizing it was time to leave, I thanked Janice for dinner and headed out. She stopped me and hugged me. "We love you, Helen," she said quietly, hugging me tightly to her. "Thank you," I muttered, taken by surprise. "I love you too. If you need anything, just call," Richard added calmly. "Thank you," I said. After saying goodbye, I got into the car and returned to the hotel. When I got back to my room, I turned on the TV for background, changed into my nightgown, and plopped down on the bed. His eyes were fixed on the screen, but his thoughts returned to the conversation with Janice. As I thought about her words, I realized that she was right about everything. Am I really as soulless and selfish as she made me out to be? "Yes," came Terry's voice, and I turned around in surprise to hear it. He stood against the wall, looking at me. "How? Why are you here?" I asked, confused. "It's simple. You fell asleep," he answered with a slight grin. Did I fall asleep? I didn't remember this. The last thing I remember is someone's voice on the TV screen. When did I fall asleep? "Are you going to appear in every dream I have?" I asked, feeling cold in my stomach. I won't be able to stand it if I start to be afraid to fall asleep. "That's the plan," he replied with a wry grin. "So you really think I'm a soulless and selfish bitch?" I blurted out, trying to take control of the situation despite my fear. "Yes," Terry answered calmly. "Your actions speak for themselves." "Look," he said, nodding at the TV. In surprise, I turned to the screen and saw something like a film about my life, or at least her favorite moments. After a few minutes, I felt tears begin to well up in my eyes as I watched scenes from our marriage. We looked so young and full of life and so happy, truly in love. As the movie continued, I saw changes, mainly in myself, and was forced to admit it. Terry was always there, supporting me when I needed it. He worked hard in those early years so that I could finish my studies. We scrimped and saved, often cooking simple meals like old burgers on the gas stove in our tiny apartment. We didn't have much at the time, but that didn't bother us. We had each other, and that was enough. After graduation, I was hired and everything began to change. We saved up for a down payment on a house and bought it while the market was open. Several more years of saving followed, but gradually everything began to improve. As my career progressed, I realized that children would become a hindrance to my work. I tried to look away, unable to see my changes, but I couldn't. I clearly saw how I became more and more selfish, how I lost respect for Terry and stopped perceiving his needs. When I looked at my bank statement and saw that one of my deposits was more than his monthly income, everything went downhill. He earned decent money, but I earned more. The fact that our lives were better because of our joint income did not matter to me. I believed that everything that was his was mine, and everything that was mine was also mine. As I looked at the screen, it became increasingly clear to me that I was the dominant partner in our marriage. And although Terry was angry, he continued to silently give in to my wishes, patiently remaining loyal to our family and to me. I saw how at some point he realized that he could live well and independently on his own means. But for him, divorce meant defeat, and he did not want to upset the delicate balance in our relationship. What about me? I, on the other hand, enjoyed my advantage in marriage. And maybe that's why I started taking an interest in Ray. By the time our physical relationship began, I had little respect for Terry. Yes, that's right, Terry whispered ominously, as if answering my unspoken thoughts. And then I suddenly realized, if Terry had shown himself a little more respect, if he had expressed his anger and pain before I left that Friday, perhaps I would not have done what I did. Friday. Was it really just 3 days ago? It seemed to me that much more time had passed. And then I heard the sound of an alarm clock. I turned and turned it off, looking at the wall where Terry was standing. He was no longer there. Was it just a dream, or something more? Terry was right. I would have to accept that his spirit might be with me forever. I got out of bed, went to the bathroom, took a shower, and brushed my teeth. I almost didn't recognize the face in the mirror. It looked tired and haggard, and it seemed to me that I had aged several years in these few days. I spent the night in bed, but did not feel rested at all. I felt as if all my strength had been drained from me. I quickly packed my things, went down to the dining room to have breakfast, and then left the hotel. When I returned to the house, the smell became noticeably weaker, but there was still a depressing atmosphere. The bedroom seemed icy, and as I walked past the sofa, I felt a chill grip me. The thought of sitting on that sofa made me shiver. I didn't know what to do next. Could Terry really have any effect on me other than in my dreams? Did I want to find out? To distract myself, I started going through his things and taking inventory. Suddenly, it occurred to me that I needed to talk to Jerry Smith, the property management specialist at our firm. I assumed he might blame me for already telling the bank about Terry's death, but I wasn't too worried about it. "I was waiting for your call," he said when he answered my call. I wondered what he could possibly know about my situation other than the fact that Terry was dead. Deciding that there was no point in asking unnecessary questions, I continued the conversation in a businesslike tone. I told him what I had already done, and he assured me that he would take care of everything. This was one of the advantages of working in our company and made my task much easier. "Thank you, Jerry. I really appreciate it," I said. I tried to sound sincere, although I probably sounded rather exhausted. "No problem. That's what they pay me for. If you can, gather all your financial documents and bring them in today. Do you think you'll make it?" "Yes, I'll be there at 3, I answered, looking at my watch. "Great, agreed," said Jerry. I spent the rest of the time collecting all the documents, including a copy of Terry's will. In the house, I was again overcome by strange sensations from time to time. I felt cold gusts of air, although all the doors and windows were closed. I also heard a creaking sound several times, as if someone was going up and down the stairs. Chalking it up to nerves, I continued my work until I had collected everything I needed. A hot shower helped me calm down, and I left the house, trading my jeans for a neater, but still casual outfit that was appropriate for the office. When I entered the office, I noticed that everyone was looking at me strangely, and then quickly turned away as soon as I caught their gaze. It was obvious that everyone knew what I had done to Ray over the weekend. I felt my face flush slightly and hurried to Jerry's office. "Decided to work a little more casually, Helen." I heard Wilson's voice behind me. I turned around and saw him with a smile, but this smile did not touch his eyes, which looked wary. "I came to meet with Jerry about Terry's latest business," I answered a little defensively. "This is probably the smartest thing you've done since Friday," he replied evenly. "When you're done, come to my office, please." "Of course," I replied, suddenly feeling excited about my career. Wilson was a true old-school gentleman, but also a managing partner, and I knew that was in order. I reached Jerry's office, and he invited me in with a discreet smile. We shook hands, and he offered me a cup of coffee while I got settled. After a few sips, I laid out the collected documents to him, and we discussed all the questions I had. "Everything seems to be in order," Jerry said, looking through the papers. "I'll take it all on myself. Is there anything else I can do to help?" "Yes, I would like to make changes to the will and trust," I replied. "That makes perfect sense," he said, picking up my file. "I see that Terry was appointed as your beneficiary and executor. He is also listed as your confidant for medical matters. Now I want to appoint my confidant's sister, Janice Hopkins," I said, "and also give her power of attorney just in case." "Understood. Fill out this form, and I will make the changes. It will only take a day or two," he assured me. "Thank you, Jerry," I thanked him, after which we ended our meeting. From there, I went to Wilson's office. The secretary waved me in, but I noticed a contemptuous look on her face, as if I was an intrusive nuisance in the office. "Helen, come in, sit down," Wilson said affably, pointing to the chair in front of his desk. "How are you holding up?" he asked caringly when I sat down. "I'm trying to cope," I answered carefully. "You look like you're not sleeping very well," he remarked, with some sympathy in his eyes. "It's not easy," I admitted. I didn't dare mention my nightmares to him if they were just nightmares. Wilson nodded and continued. "I think you can already guess why I wanted to talk to you. The senior partners are extremely unhappy. Your husband sent letters to almost all employees of the company, and it's naive to believe that this won't go beyond the office, if it hasn't already. It can be said that your personal and professional reputation has been seriously damaged. The only reason you haven't been fired yet is because of your excellent work for our firm over the past 20 years. Having considered his words, as well as what he did not say, but what was read in his gaze, I made a decision that I might regret, but which seemed the only possible one. Perhaps I should offer my resignation," I said quietly, feeling anxiety swell inside me. Wilson was silent for a few moments, as if contemplating my move, and at least showed tact by not jumping at the suggestion right away. Wilson nodded before answering, and I knew I had understood his hints correctly. "As much as I hate losing you, Helen, I think this might be the best decision. However, given your length of service and impeccable reputation prior to this weekend, as well as your willingness to take responsibility for your actions, I believe your partners will be willing to keep you on the payroll until the end of the month. This should be enough time to settle all the issues with Terry's funeral and affairs." Without any irony, he added, "I hope you won't be offended by this turn of events. We will offer you a reasonable severance package that you can move on with. You are smart, driven, one of the best lawyers I have ever met. I'm sure you'll find somewhere to use your abilities." "Thank you, Mr. Bledsoe. I appreciate it," I replied quietly, feeling almost like I was in a theater, as if I were reciting lines from a radio drama. "Please, perhaps you should consider a change of scenery. Have you ever been to Boise?" he asked with a neutral intonation. "Boise? You mean in Idaho?" "No, I wasn't. Why are you asking?" I was surprised, perceiving this as an unexpected turn in the conversation. "I have an old friend, a managing partner in a firm there. He's looking for someone with your experience and skills. If you want, I can recommend it to you." "Of course," I said with slight hesitation. "Wonderful. I'll let him know," Wilson said, handing me a business card. I glanced at it and put it in my bag. Sure, I could have called Ray, but part of me didn't want anything to do with him anymore. Out of gloomy curiosity, I asked, "Can I ask about Ray? What will happen to him?" He looked at me thoughtfully, as if he was considering whether to answer, and finally made a decision. "As you know, Helen, I can't go into detail. Privacy and all that. Let's put it this way. Miss Bland has exhausted any remaining trust among the senior partners. You may not know it, but you are not the first employee whose marriage he ruined. That's why he was transferred to this office after the divorce. His ex-wife found him with his assistant. It was an extremely unpleasant scam, to put it mildly." He glanced at the table and began to mechanically draw something on the sheet. "The court ordered us to keep him at work so that he could pay a very generous salary," he muttered, as if it had come out accidentally. "I didn't know any of this," I answered, shocked. Of course, I knew about his reputation, and that's why I chose him for my first affair, but I didn't know all this. Crap. Well, now I need to go to a meeting. "I'm truly sorry for your loss, Helen, and I'm sure we'll see each other again before you leave." Wilson stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. "I'll be back," I said. "I still need to sign some documents." "Thank you for everything," I added, shaking his hand. Having difficulty holding back tears, I hastily left the office, trying not to meet my colleagues' eyes, although I was sure that they were all watching me leave. Walking out into the parking lot, I finally burst into tears in the car. I loved this job and loved working with the people here. To make matters worse, I worked here for over 20 years. The thought of leaving, for boys, seemed like a banishment to Siberia for my sins. Eventually, I calmed down enough to go home, although it was difficult as the tears were still clouding my eyes. I almost got into a couple of accidents due to blurred vision. When I got home, I sat down on a small sofa, covered my face with my hands, and began to sob uncontrollably over the loss of my favorite job. I cried until I heard a sharp bang in the living room. I looked around, not understanding what had happened. And then I saw it. A 5x7 photo from our wedding, which had been lying on the table for many years, fell face down. Goosebumps ran across my skin. With trembling hands, I picked up the photo and saw that the glass was broken, as if it had been hit. I had a strange feeling as if a thundercloud was gathering over my head. I nearly vomited at the realization of how painful it was to realize that I had cried so much more over the loss of my job than over the loss of my husband. Shocked, I threw the broken photograph onto the sofa and looked around the room to see if anything else had moved. I couldn't explain how this photograph could suddenly fall with such force, and then it dawned on me. It had to be Terry's doing. In an instant, I went from fear to rage, then back to fear, then to anger. "Leave me alone," I screamed into the void. "You're dead. Leave. Stop playing with me, damn you." The temperature in the room dropped sharply, and it became darker. I half expected things to start flying off the shelves, and I thought I heard crazy laughter coming from the stairs. I couldn't stay in this house for anything in the world. I grabbed my phone and quickly called Janice. "Hello, little sister. How are you?" she answered cheerfully. "Not good. Can I spend the night with you? Please?" I begged, feeling my voice trembling. Her tone immediately changed to one of concern. "Of course you can. We will prepare a room for you. Everything is fine?" she asked. "No, not all. I'll tell you when I arrive." "Thank you," I answered, ending the call. We finished the conversation, and I ran upstairs to pack my things for the night again. I threw things into my bag, not caring about neatness. I needed to get out of here before Terry did something else. I walked down the stairs, holding the railing tightly so as not to fall, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. I felt like if I wasn't careful, Terry might push me over. I ran out to the garage, threw my bag into the car, and drove away. If this had been a cheap horror movie, I would have had smoking tire streaks on the asphalt trailing behind me. Janice met me at the door, and I fell into her arms, sobbing. She hugged me, trying to console me as much as possible. Finally, she persuaded me to sit on the sofa and calm down so that I could talk. "My God, little sister, what happened? Did someone break into your house?" "This is worse than a break-in," I moaned doomedly. "This is Terry. Terry, he's dead after all. What can he do?" Janice looked at me strangely. I told my sister everything I had experienced the last 2 nights and what happened when I returned home. She listened without interrupting while I poured out my whole story to her, almost haltingly. "He's trying to drive me crazy." "I'm sure it is," I finished sobbing. "Sister, you have been under a lot of stress lately. Maybe you just need to relax a little and get a good night's sleep," Janice said, trying to calm me down. "No, you don't understand. He wrote in his suicide note that he wanted me to see his face every time I closed my eyes. And so it is. I haven't been able to sleep well since Sunday. And now this. And on top of everything, I quit to avoid being fired." I sobbed again, as if there wasn't a single drop of tears left in my body, but that turned out to be a mistake. Oh no, what will you do with the house? And with all your bills? I have savings, and insurance will cover the mortgage. I officially work until the end of the month. I was promised severance pay. But I can't stay in this house any longer. You don't understand. Terry hates me. If I stay there, he will kill me, I said, almost falling into hysterics. Well, sister, you are a reasonable person. This is already too much, don't you think? How can a dead person harm you or kill you? Janice asked intelligently, trying to make me see the absurdity of my fears, but she could not understand how it really was. But you weren't there, I objected. Yes, I wasn't. You know what? Let me take your things upstairs, then make you a cup of hot chamomile tea and a cheese sandwich. This will calm you down, and then we can talk calmly, okay? Okay, I answered, feeling like a frightened schoolgirl hiding from a monster under the bed. Janice carried my things upstairs, then went into the kitchen, where she made 2 cups of tea and 2 cheese sandwiches. She brought them on a tray into the living room and sat down next to me. I started drinking tea with honey and took a bite of the sandwich, which turned out to be very tasty. I was filled with warm memories of our childhood, and within a couple of minutes I felt more relaxed. Are you feeling better? Janice asked softly. Yes, a lot, I answered, taking a deep breath. Thank you. Please, did you tell anyone else that you were seeing Terry? No. What are you doing? They'll send me straight to a mental hospital. Not necessarily. You've been through a lot these past few days. Seeing Terry like that must have been a shock to your psyche. Maybe you should take a few days off and get away from it all. I can talk to Richard, and if he agrees, you can stay at the lake house. A couple of days in nature might do you good, Janice suggested. Perhaps you're right. Wilson also said that I needed to leave. He suggested that I go to Boys. In Boys? What's there? Janice raised her eyebrows in surprise. Wilson's friend has a law firm there, and he seems to be looking for a good lawyer, I answered. Are you going to accept his offer? Janice asked. Don't know. It's probably worth at least calling, but I don't want to leave. You and Richard are the only family I have left, I said, sipping my tea. By the way, I changed my will and power of attorney. You are now my sole heir and administrator of my trust. I have also appointed you as my attorney in case something happens to me. I hope you don't mind. Of course not, Janice answered. But you are still young. I'm sure you have many more years to live. I hope so. But I like to be prepared for anything, I said. We continued to drink tea and eat in silence for a couple of minutes. I really ruined everything, didn't I? I whispered in pain. You certainly didn't help your reputation, Janice replied diplomatically. I guess I just wanted to have both at the same time, I added sarcastically. And look what it cost you, Janice said quietly. She didn't add anything, but I already knew how much my greed and lust had cost me. My husband of 24 years is dead, my career is essentially over, and I haven't been able to sleep well for days. All because I listened to the gossip among my colleagues and decided that I definitely needed Ray Bland. Yes, I sighed sadly. But now it's too late to cry over spilled milk, as our mother liked to say. You need to get it together, sis. You're right, I nodded. I really need to get myself together. I guess I'll take your suggestion to get my thoughts in order, but now I just need to sleep. A yawn, so strong that it even tightened my jaw, did not allow me to finish. The tea did its job, and the eyelids began to droop on their own. Come on, I'll take you upstairs, Janice said. Otherwise, you'll fall asleep right here on the couch. She helped me up and led me into the guest bedroom, where the bed was already made. I barely had time to change into my nightgown before Janice pulled the blanket over me and I fell asleep. So you decided to run away to your sister, thinking that you could hide from me. Terry's voice sounded sarcastically. I looked around and saw that the bedroom was filled with a thick gray fog, like a thick cloud. Terry came out of the closet. Why are you here? Why can't you leave me alone? I asked in despair. Should I leave you alone? Ha! I will never leave you, Terry said ominously. It was you in the house, with the photograph, right? I asked. Did you do it? Yes. It took some work to gather enough energy to do this. But now that I know it's possible, I'll do it more often, Terry chuckled. Please, can't you just leave me alone? You're dead. You have to move on, I pleaded. Yes, I'm dead. But whose fault is it, eh? I didn't force you to do this, I answered, trying to push away the despair that gripped me. Yes, it was either me or your boyfriend, but he was too cowardly to get out of the car, Terry barked back. Were you going to kill Ray? I was terrified. My Terry, my quiet, caring Terry, was going to become a killer. Would you kill me? I stammered. I thought about it seriously. But that would be too fast, and I wanted you to feel the pain, he answered coldly. It shouldn't have been this way, I objected, almost shouting. His eyes flashed an ominous red light, and I involuntarily shrank, suppressing a cry. How should it have been, darling? Terry roared so loudly that I instinctively stepped back. Did you think that I would go along with your little plans of humiliation, that I would turn into a pathetic shadow of a man that you would not respect? That I'll just leave you the divorce papers and disappear so your legal team can tear me to pieces? That I would leave with everything I could and live on the run, hiding from the private detectives you could afford? Or will I burn the house down and spend years behind bars? Should I have just discussed this with my family or friends? Where do you think my family was? Where were my friends? I don't have a single person left except you whom I can trust. So yeah, I had no good options left except one that left me with at least a shred of dignity. And this choice was to do something that you never expected. So, yes, I pulled the trigger because it was the only path you left me on. You may not see it in the light, but it's still there. And nothing will get you out of it, Terry added with a dark grin. And I can't leave. I still have unfinished things to do. I can't move forward, up or down, until these things are completed. By the way, you still haven't answered my question. Was your little sexual escapade with Bland worth all the consequences? You lost not only me, but also your job, which I know you loved more than me. Listen, Terry, I'm sorry. Fine, I shouldn't have done this. I understand it now. Go away. Leave me alone, I whispered, almost without strength. I was so exhausted that I couldn't even resist the fear and guilt. Oh, I don't think you really understood that, Terry replied, his tone laced with icy sarcasm. You're right, you shouldn't have done that. In fact, you didn't even have to think about it. But you still think you have the right to do whatever you want and let the whole world go to hell. It's still about you. And as for leaving you alone, that won't happen. Never. Please, Terry, I beg you. I can't take it anymore, I screamed as tears streamed down my face again. Well, what you want is one thing, but what you get is something completely different, as they say. I wanted a faithful wife who would love me as much as I loved her. And what did I get, huh? Enjoy the rest of your pathetic life. He grinned evilly before bursting into manic laughter. He disappeared, dissolving into a gray fog. I fell helplessly onto the pillow, and tears kept flowing down my cheeks. The next thing I remember is the sun coming through the window. I stood up, smelling the smell of frying bacon wafting from downstairs. I went to the bathroom, washed my face, changed my clothes, and went downstairs. I didn't feel better, but at least I didn't feel worse. Good morning, said Richard, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. Janice has almost finished preparing breakfast. Get yourself some coffee and sit down. Thanks, I guess I'll do that, I replied, nodding affably to Janice, who was just putting the bacon on a plate. I picked up my coffee mug, thinking that something stronger would be nice, and returned to the table. How did you sleep? Richard asked, seeing my tired face. Not really, I admitted. Did you see him again last night? Janice asked, setting the bacon and a plate of scrambled eggs on the table. I looked at her, then at Richard. He didn't look surprised or skeptical, just worried. For a moment, I felt annoyed that Janice had shared my revelations with her husband. But then I realized that they are a real married couple, and they have practically no secrets. Yes, I answered. Am I going crazy? I'm a surgeon, not a psychiatrist, he answered with a slight smile. But from what Janice told me, I would say that you have experienced enormous psychological trauma and are experiencing a lot of stress. First Terry, now work. Maybe you're right, I answered quickly, not wanting to talk about all my failures again. But if you want, I can talk to our psychiatrist at the hospital. They say she is very good at her job. Perhaps she can help you. Perhaps I'll accept your offer, I said. We all grabbed a piece of bacon and an omelet and started eating breakfast. Janice was a great cook and her food was always delicious. We also thought you could stay at our lake house. Janice, and I don't mind if you want to spend a few days there. This might help you come to your senses, Richard suggested. That would be great, I said. I knew the medical examiner probably wouldn't be able to free Terry's body before the end of the week, and I still had 3 weeks left before the official end of work. A couple of days at the lake could really help. Wonderful. So it's decided. I'll give you the key to the house before I go to work. Are you sure you can get there yourself? Yes, I can handle it, I answered with a slight smile. We finished breakfast, and I helped Janice clear the table. Richard took the key out of his pocket and handed it to me. I had already been to their house many times and knew the way. Enjoy your vacation, he wished with a smile. Thank you both for everything, I said, hugging them both. You're welcome, Janice replied, and call if you need anything. We said goodbye and I got ready to go. I thought about stopping by home to grab a few more things, but after yesterday I didn't want to go back there. After everything that happened, I couldn't stay in this house alone. I bought a few things for the first time at Walmart and hit the road again. Driving down a 2-lane road outside of town with the windows down and the music loud, I was almost to the lake when it happened again. Great day for a trip, isn't it? A voice came from the passenger seat. I shuddered and looked to the side. Terry sat there, his gaze fixed on the window. What are you doing here? I almost screamed, grabbing the steering wheel harder. You fell asleep at the wheel. It's not safe, he replied, turning his head towards me. You better watch the road. There's an intersection ahead. The world exploded around me. A huge truck crashed into my door with a roar. See you, Terry whispered before I passed out. Hello, Mrs. Hopkins, the secretary greeted cheerfully as Janice signed the visitor's log. Hi, Amy, Janice replied. How is Miss Baker today? She asked the unit's head nurse, April Callahan, as she walked up to the front desk. Janice had come every week for the past 25 years, and the nurse knew she was coming. No changes. She just sits in a chair, watches TV, or out the window. The nights seem to be the hardest for her. She still claims to see her dead husband in her dreams, April replied with a hint of sadness. Janice already knew this, but she also knew that over the years Helen had come to terms with it, and Terry's nightly visits no longer filled her with the same horror. But something strange happened the other day, April added as they walked down the hallway toward Helen's room. What exactly? Asked Janice. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, April began. Do you know that photo from her wedding that is on the chest of drawers in her room? Yes, I know. It was done on their wedding day, Janice answered with a slight sadness in her voice. So, I was in her room when the photograph suddenly fell face down. And she didn't just fall, it was as if she had been thrown so hard that the glass broke. I almost jumped in surprise. Maybe it was a draft, Janice suggested cautiously, feeling a chill on her skin. No, all the windows were closed and there were no fans, April answered with confidence. That's strange, Janice said casually, although she felt a sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach. She remembered Helen telling her about the same incident when a photograph had broken in the house just before the accident that left her in a coma. April continued, the strangest thing was Helen's reaction. She just smiled, looked at me and said, he's still mad at me. Does this mean anything to you? In a strange way, yes, Janice answered calmly, smiling slightly. I hope you'll tell me this story someday, April added. Anyway, I have to go on a round, but before I leave, they want to see you in the office about benefits for Miss Baker. Okay, we'll talk later, Janice said. She walked to her sister's room and looked at Helen, a frail woman in a wheelchair at the window, who was now 71 years old. The day of the accident flashed back to my memory as if it were yesterday. Helen was heading to the lake house when a huge truck crashed into her, followed by another coming in the opposite direction. According to the police report, Helen must have fallen asleep at the wheel and ran a red light. Janice and Richard blamed themselves for a long time for not insisting on driving her themselves. According to the police report, she was entirely at fault, so the insurance company refused to cover the damage. Luckily, Helen was still on her company's health insurance, and this covered the initial hospital costs. The benefits did not cover long-term care, and Janice, acting under Helen's power of attorney, ended up using all of her funds, including her retirement savings and insurance. The rest of the funds went to provide for her sister. All assets, including the house, were sold. Janice knew that if Helen lived much longer, she might have to move her to a less comfortable facility. "Look what I brought you," Janice said, taking a new blanket from her bag. "I just finished knitting." "How handsome," Helen whispered. "Thank you. I think it will keep you warm at night." "For sure," Helen replied, staring out the window again. "Can you keep a secret?" she asked quietly, as if she needed a confession before leaving. "Of course," Janice replied. "That weekend when I was with Ray, even Terry doesn't know yet, but I realized that it wasn't worth it," Helen whispered, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. The temperature in the room suddenly dropped noticeably, and the hospital bed shook slightly. Janice winced and looked back at her sister. "It seems he already knows, dear," she answered quietly. "Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. 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 Click to the next one.